Hey everyone, I've just watched on the BBC the news that the British grandmother Lindsay Sandiford has been sentenced to death in Bali on drugs charges. This has been quite a high profile case in the last few months. Um, I'd like to talk a little about this and divide the video into two sort of segments. One segment, one half so to speak, will be specifically about this case, okay? Specifically about this case. And the second half will be about the wider issues. If you don't know much about the background to this, you'll find many sources. This is Lindsay Sandiford, a 56-year-old grandmother. I believe she's from Hull, but I might be wrong about that. Sorry, from Gloucestershire. Was arrested in May last year as she entered Indonesia on a flight from Bangkok with £1.6 million worth of the Class A drug, cocaine, stuffed into her luggage. Now, when this sentence was read out, even the prosecutors were surprised. They had called for 15 years imprisonment, but she's been sentenced to death by firing squad. This is often the topical issue in terms of Southeast Asia and foreigners. And it's certainly one that's quite complex. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions about my stance on this, before you sort of think, oh, you're some lefty, or you're going to say let her off, etc., etc., I don't quite believe that, so hear me out. Firstly, I don't think... her argument was that she'd been coerced into it by this drug gang who had threatened her children. If there's truth in that, that's something I hope the judge and the legal system strongly considered, this issue about coercion, in which case the tougher penalty should be for those who coerced her. But this isn't a case of someone who was planted with drugs. I mean, £1.6 million worth of cocaine. We're not talking a small amount here. And she was paraded in front of the press with the drugs that she had. Now, I think if you go to Southeast Asia knowingly transporting drugs, or if you mess around with drugs in Southeast Asia at all, you're incredibly stupid. It's one of the stupidest things you can do, because it's not like there's any mystery about their harsh laws that exist for these crimes. It's well documented. So she certainly can't plead the ignorance as an excuse, because you don't have to be a genius to work out that there are very severe penalties in countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, China for these offences. In terms of her punishment, I've made another video explaining why I'm against the death penalty. My instinct is I'm still against the death penalty. But before people jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, you're biased, or she knew what she was doing, etc., I do think she should be punished and receive a pretty hefty custodial sentence. I think what the prosecution were calling for would have been about right. 15 years imprisonment. I believe the death penalty is wrong, and I made another video explaining why, regardless of the crime. Now, I'm not ignorant as to damage that drugs cause. I believe drugs are evil, and I believe those who transport drugs and deal with drugs and exploit through other people's misery are lowlifes. So I believe this woman was very selfish and very... she says she was coerced into it. I find that claim dubious. If that's the case, she could have reported the gang to police in Britain and sorted it out in Britain. But it appears she didn't do that. She could have sorted that out there and then and got them arrested in the UK. And But the fact she has actually taken this risk, I mean, she must have known that the laws that exist in these countries. Um, and just in case anyone wants to misinterpret this video, I do believe she should be punished. I don't think she's innocent in this case. I think she was caught with the drugs, and even she hasn't claimed that she was planted with them. She says that she was coerced, so she's admitting her guilt. She should be punished. But the idea of firing squad in another country, and by the way, I'd be saying the same if this was Texas or Georgia or any American state. I'd be saying exactly the same thing. It seems that's a pretty cold, inhumane thing as well. Now, drugs are evil, there's no question about it. But, you know, I just had a look on the Daily Mail website, and predictably there was a lot of people say, oh, she deserved it. She knew what she was getting herself into. Now, I agree insofar as she was stupid and she should be punished, but I believe the death penalty... You know, the reason the Indonesians gave for carrying out the death sentence was that she has damaged the reputation of Bali, and that's probably true. But the death penalty, in my opinion, also damages the reputation of Bali. In my opinion, the death penalty is a violation of human rights. Now, you're going to be, you know, conservative people watching this might say, oh, you're a namby-pamby liberal, or she hasn't considered the human rights of drug victims and so on. I believe human rights are universal, and even lowlifes deserve human rights. I do believe she should be punished with a long sentence in an Indonesian prison. But the death penalty is... I take the same stance of the British government. I oppose the death penalty in this case. She hasn't killed anyone. She hasn't committed an act of terrorism. She's committed a serious crime, and let's not trivialise drugs. But by the same token, the victims of drugs choose to take those drugs. Dealers are lowlifes, there's no question about that. But so are... People choose to take drugs, so their suffering is also their responsibility. Therefore, I don't know, it's a difficult issue. On one hand, I do see these governments' point. They recognise that drugs are a stain on this world, and they're taking a very hard line against it. And I do believe there should be tough penalties for drug dealers. I find it hard to believe this woman was a hardened drug lord. I think she's a drug mule, a high-level drug mule. She knew what she was doing, and the coercion claim is dubious, like I say, because I think she could have reported the gang and those threats to British police, because as far from what I understand, the coercion happened in the UK. She could have reported that crime here. But, you know, I'd just like to make the point that... So, I'm well over halfway now. I'll get onto the wider issues. Talking about her case, I believe what the prosecution were calling for would have been about right. 15 years imprisonment. And the judge seems to have went for a harsher sentence than that. And it's... I would say one thing, even if you think she deserves the death penalty, at least don't glorify it. At least don't... There's nothing pleasant about this situation. Even if you agree with the death penalty, at least don't glorify it and act like it's a good thing, like it's something to celebrate. Killing a human being, whatever way you call it, is killing a human being. It's not something to glorify. Even if she deserves it, let's not celebrate her situation. Yes, she's responsible for the situation that she's in. That's true, but let's not celebrate that. Okay, that's about that specific case. On wider issues, I think there's a lot of flaws. I quite frankly don't trust the legal systems of countries, some countries in the Far East. Definitely don't trust the Chinese legal system or the Vietnamese. Indonesia has went through a democracy process, so it's probably improved. But this is a significant issue because I believe in many situations key evidence is ignored. Now, I'm not talking about the Lindsay Sandiford situation, so don't. I'm talking about the wider issues here. I'll cite one example. 2009, a British citizen, Ajmal Sheikh, he was of Middle Eastern background, but he was a British citizen, was executed in China. Now, again, it was he was accused of drug smuggling. In that situation, there was a serious issue of concern because he was widely reported to have a mental age of a child. He was in his mid-30s, but he was reported to have had a mental age of a child. The Chinese went ahead and executed him, I believe, to show that they were standing up to the West or whatever. That's how they interpreted it. But I believe that was morally unjustified because they did not take the mental health factor into consideration. And I don't believe that mitigating factors are fully taken into consideration in countries that use the death penalty, and I include the United States in that. Mitigating factors like key evidence, mitigating factors like mental health of those on trial, mitigating factors like people being planted with drugs. Now, anyone who's ever seen the film Bangkok Hilton, that's an interesting film. It shows an Australian backpacker who strikes up a relationship with an Australian man. She gets planted with drugs, she ends up in a Thai prison. Now, I don't know how realistic that film is, but it's quite a widely quoted film, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is some realism in that. I don't believe these countries consider the prospect of people being planted with drugs, in which case someone is innocent. Now, if you're on a long journey, I'm going to go to China next month, and I'm going to make sure my case is... I'll keep eyes on it like a hawk. I do believe some Westerners are profoundly naive, either because they dabble in drugs or they're just naive. They won't look after their cases, or... it does depress me. But, you know, I'm not sort of here saying that, oh, it's terrible, it's barbaric, these people should be freed. I believe they should be punished. Like I say, drugs are evil. Drugs ruin lives around the world. But I don't believe you balance that out with something as primitive as the death penalty. And I do regard the death penalty as a very inhumane sort of punishment. Sorry, I'm just texting something to a friend very quickly. Just a Chinese friend, I'm just texting her something. Yeah, so basically, these issues are not black and white. There are a lot of Westerners who actually strongly back governments that do this and say, they knew the risks, let them have it. And there's almost a sadistic pleasure from that. Now, if you agree with the death penalty, at least don't enjoy it. At least don't... There's absolutely nothing about the death penalty to be glorified. Even if there's... And like I said in my last video, I believe there are valid views on both sides. But whatever you think of death penalty, if you support it, at least don't enjoy it. At least don't glorify it. You know, I believe drugs are evil, and I really do think drug lords are lowlifes. But I also think the death penalty was too harsh on this occasion. This woman isn't like the Mexican drug cartel. She hasn't brutally killed anyone. Now, she's committed a serious crime, and she should absolutely be punished for that. I repeat, she should be punished for that. But death penalty, in this case, I think is too harsh. I don't know if that will be commuted or what the legal process will be. The British government has said that they strongly oppose the death penalty. I'm in agreement with my government on this. I believe that Indonesians should have taken the coercion issue more seriously, although I think she was wrong not to report that when she was in the UK. But from what I understand, they haven't considered that aspect. well, I've come to the end of the 15 minutes, so I'll have to leave it there. No doubt people have strong views on this situation. There's nothing to glorify here. Even if you think she deserves it, don't glorify it. Because in the end of the day, someone is facing death. She must be terrified right now, and let's just not glorify that. Okay, thanks for watching.